Hello, hello. My name is Dr. Rachel Gainsbrugh, and I am obsessed with all things short-term rentals, revenue streams, and helping you navigate your career, real estate, and your busiest and most wonderful seasons of life. So grab your coffee, get comfortable as you get ready to learn and grow with me. This is the Luxury Short-Term Rental Doctor podcast. Hello, everyone. Welcome to another Luxury Rental Doctor podcast for show. I think this episode has been long overdue. I have the amazing Anurag Verma here with us. He is the co-founder of Pricelabs. Let me let you know a little bit about Anurag. So before Pricelabs, he used to work for United Airlines, designing and improving revenue management algorithms and systems. Back in 2014, he brought that experience from revenue management, automation that's prevalent within airlines and hotels into the vacation rental and short term rental space as well. Now, he has a background in mathematics and statistics, and he is also in a PhD in operations and research. So, a fellow doctor in the room, which I'm super excited about. Anurag, I've got so much to share with you, my friend. I know you from seeing you at live events. You are someone who supports our community. We love to send our members your way. We are actual utilizers of Price Labs ourselves, and I've got an
Yeah,
interesting
yeah,
story to share with you. But without further ado, I would love you to introduce yourself to the people, and we'll dive right into the episode.
yeah. I think we already gave you a mouthful to say, uh, but no, like pretty plain. Anurag, one of the co-founders at Price Labs. I mainly work on data science and product management at Price Labs. So how to improve our algorithms, what data to use, how to use it, um, how to how should the UI be so that the customers can interact with the algorithm, or like what else can we make with the same data that we already have, and those kinds of things, right? Yeah. Also, unlike you, I think not a real doctor. So yeah, wanted to put that
Gotcha.
out.
Yeah. And so you mentioned something a
Yeah,
little bit earlier. I want to acquaint you
yeah,
to our audience. Our
yeah,
audience are busy doctors who are looking to leverage
yeah,
using short term rental or midterm rental as their investing strategy. So, not very, I would say, tech um, aware for on
okay,
the, I guess, the product management roadmap, so to speak. So, what is
yeah.
UI and why does it matter?
Right. So UI is anytime UI stands for user interface, and then the cousin is user experience, right? So we have a dynamic pricing algorithm. We have a lot of data. We want to show that data to our customers. We want our customers to have the right pricing strategy in place and automate that. But it's at the end of the day, you are logging into our system and interacting with our system. How can we make those interactions uh, simple but powerful? That's sort of the crux of it. Anybody can make simple stuff that doesn't do anything. You can put an on and off button at anywhere, and if it doesn't do anything, there is no complexity. Uh, but if you want it to do something useful, then you need to have the customer doing some interaction with it. Think of a car, for example, right? Um, 30, 40 years back, you would key it in, you would shift from neutral to first, you would leave the clutch and start on the accelerator, or which way I don't know anymore, because now user interface has improved so much, you don't worry about gears so
Yeah,
much, right? There is no clutch anymore,
no.
right? So that's for some people that's like worse user interface, but for a lot of people, cars have just become more accessible and easier. You don't need to be a professional. Even earlier, you didn't need to be professional driver, but like a lot more people can now use cars than before, right? So how can we make um, any software better so that more people can figure out these complex pricing decisions or calculations and things like that?
Yeah, and I love that. And I feel like The more technology advances, the more access we're able to have to certain
Yeah.
resources, and we'll tap into that in a moment. So, what is Price Labs, Anurag?
Yeah. So anybody who has booked flight tickets has probably experienced it. I used to work for United Airlines, and my role was primarily improving our algorithms that determine those prices, right? So uh, when if you're coming to Chicago in February, um, Chicago is super cold in February. Uh, very few people show up. Planes are running half empty sometimes. What can be done? So, like as an airline, for example, you have a plane that is flying.
Yeah.
You can't just cancel the flight, because if you cancel too many flights, eventually customers think of you as unreliable and things like that. So just because the flight is empty, you don't want to cancel it. You shouldn't cancel it. Now you're already incurring uh, like the cost to fly the plane from one city to another, the cost of the crew, the pilots, the flight attendants, that's not going anywhere. So whether you fly the plane half empty or you fill up a few more seats at a even if at a discounted rate, that is all incremental. The additional people on the plane don't cost too much, because most of the cost is this fixed cost, right?
Hmm.
So the thought is, how can we set up pricing? One way is like to discount the prices all the way to the floor. And now you might get the plane fully booked at $10 a ticket, and you've actually made less money than with the half empty plane. The
Yeah.
second way is to say, okay, we can't give every ticket out for $10. In fact, we should not give any ticket out for $10. But how can we, the 50 people who are willing to pay the full price, is there something about them? Maybe they tend to book very late. Maybe these are business travelers, right? So we want to protect 50 seats for the business travelers who will pay the full price. But can we discount the early bookers, like maybe 20 or 30 tickets, so that we get something more than what we would have otherwise gotten? So that's what you do in airlines. Now, how does it translate to short-term rentals? And the story basically goes, I was doing this for airlines, and one of my very close friends was studying at that time in Chicago, and he's like, I'm listing my roommate's empty room on Airbnb while he's on his internship,
Hmm.
and he's like, Airbnb is not suggesting what price do I put. It's saying, like, do I put 100 everywhere? Should I have it higher in summer? Are there some dates where it should be higher than others? And he and I got discussing, and we were like, okay, like, there are plenty of Airbnb hosts around the world, like, that are probably thinking about the same thing. How can we help them set the right price? Um, and to start off, we didn't know the answer, and so we said, okay, we'll experiment a little. So like the whole Pricelabs name came from that, to say, okay, what will work, what will not work. So we found a bunch of things over time. Most locations have what's called seasonality.
Yeah.
There is a high season, there is a low season. You should increase prices, or you should be able to charge more in high season and low in low season. Um, there is in most places there is a day of week pattern. If you're in a vacation destination, you're likely going to have a lot more demand during weekends than
Yeah.
midweek. If you're in a business hub, you potentially have a higher demand during midweek because of business travel.
Yeah.
Um, Even if you are in not in short terms but in midterm, you see similar patterns. Like, uh, for example, when summer internships are going on, a lot more people are looking for 2 to 3 month long housing, right?
Yeah.
Um, there are events and holidays that are holidays are predictable, but events are very unpredictable. There are times, like when we started, we knew about Chicago Marathon, and we knew a ton of people come there. One of the craziest findings we had was the weekend after Chicago Marathon. Every year, more or less, is something called Chicago Open House,
Mm.
which is like a lot of buildings in Chicago open their doors to say, hey, even if you don't work there or live there, you're welcome to come in and have a look. This is
Oh.
like, this is kind of a thing that Chicago does.
Mm.
And we realized that has almost the same demand spike as the marathon. And almost no one, like, if you're new to Chicago, you don't know about it. If you're not
Mm,
in Chicago, you don't know about it. But there are definitely these architecture enthusiasts who are into it, who are flying and staying in short-term rentals in hotels, right? So you're like, okay, as an individual host, like, how do you keep track of these things? And we
mm,
said, okay, can we keep track of the data so that our we can update prices for our customers on their behalf. They still get control to say what's the minimum you want to go to, what's the maximum, and there's plenty of bells and whistles and knobs to say, I never want to take a short booking, like less than 2 nights long, or when it's far out, do this. Uh,
yeah.
but how can we build all of that so that a busy host or manager doesn't have to spend extra hours just researching the market all the time and
Yeah.
yet can make more revenue out of there. So, like, the parallel to the plane here is if you have a vacation home,
Hmm.
uh, you likely have a mortgage on that, right?
Yeah.
So, that is going out regardless of whether somebody stays there or not. So, how can I make it's okay during low months to not make enough revenue to meet your mortgage, uh, as long as over the course of a year you make it in the long run, you make it, right? So peak months are going to make a lot more, and slow months are going to make a lot less. Just because slow months are going to make less doesn't mean that they should make zero. That's sort of the thought, because whatever little the low months make, they help cross the annual threshold to say, okay, my total mortgage was this much, and even though 90% of that got covered in the peak months, the slow months help me actually make some profit.
I love that. Yeah, yeah. And I believe that this is exactly what we had experienced. So now it's story time. So Anurag, back in
Yeah,
I want to say 2019-ish, I had launched one midterm rental in my market. It's a residential
yeah,
subdivision market in the south of Atlanta market. And that property was doing really well. We launched it without Pricelabs, but then we learned about dynamic pricing. And I tell my community, if you're not using Pricelabs, you're leaving a lot of money on the table, right? And so once I launched the second property, it was a larger property. And I said to myself, okay, since it's larger, the cleaning team was having a little bit of a transition period. I was going to onboard a new cleaning team, but for the first month, I pre marketed the property. I wanted a 30-day minimum stay just to start, and then we're going to
yeah,
adjust it to 2 night, 3 night stay minimum. Since it was a larger property, I was anticipating it would make anywhere around $8,000 or $9,000 per month. The smaller property was making about 6 to 7 thousand. So I said 8 or 9 thousand on average. There's no way. I was like, dare I think $10,000, but
yeah,
my self-limiting belief. I'm a little girl from Haiti. I was like, who has $10,000 a month to spend? That's just outrageous. There's no way that that market could, I would say, have that level of demand absorbed
yeah,
in that market. So I turn on the dynamic pricing tool, Pricelabs, and I know sometimes it requires some adjustments. Sometimes it's a little bit higher than I would expect, or a little bit lower. So I was going to play around with it. But when I turned it on, expecting about 8 or 9 thousand. It listed my property for $28,000 for the next 30 days. And I was
okay,
like,
yeah,
no, the mortgage is twenty five
yeah,
hundred a month. There's no way. So let me go ahead and adjust it because Pricelabs has AI. I'm not sure why it went so high. So let me go ahead and turn it off and adjust it. Before I turned it off, it got booked. It got booked the next month. It was
yeah,
booked for 15,000 to twenty one
yeah,
thousand, and it was just
yeah,
gangbusters. And I had to
got it.
take a step back and think to myself, where else am I playing small in my life? I was like, I was going to adjust it based on, my limiting beliefs, my thought of, oh, okay, it's going to be a family traveling. But turns out it was attracting the film industry, the insurance companies, and so more of corporations whose pockets are a little bit deeper because I know I'm not spending $28,000 as an individual, but the corporations, it was a whole different avatar. Business travelers with cast and crew and groups, and
Yeah,
it just blew my mind. And I tapped into a new audience. that I wasn't aware of. A few months later, AirDNA and a casting company called Mystics Arts reached out for us to
Yeah.
be featured on a Netflix TV show.
All right.
And so I say,
Yeah.
listen, I know that you talked about UI,
Yeah.
user interface, user experience initially.
Yeah.
I felt that Pricelabs, now it's much better. It was even a little clunkier then. People were like, you should try this
Yeah.
tool, you should try that. And no, I'm not trying any tool.
Yeah.
I'm going to stay the course with Pricelabs. And I'm just so excited that, you guys continue to offer not only updates and you're implementing things that will improve the user interface, but you offer a ton of training. When people ask me how to use Pricelabs, say, hey, hop on the training. There's trainings all
Yeah.
the time. There's a whole library of training, and for me, that's where I see the value. For is in Pricelabs is just the support, the level of support, the level of trainings. But I wanted to share that little story with you, Anurag. I don't know if
That
you're aware of it.
I did not. So there are multiple things I have so many questions on. Like, what kind of a large house is this that has a $2,500 mortgage? Like, that itself seems quite something.
Yeah,
But then it's the there are two parts to like when something gets priced uh, that high. One, if you had sent us a question, we would have said, hey, we need to look at the base price, right? The base price, if it is too high, and we come up with a base price, we show market recommendations, like because we look at data from Airbnb and Verbo, like scrape data from there. We say, okay, like similar houses are listed at, let's say, 700 a night, right? Uh, but then at the end of the day, like this is true in the real estate industry in general. Every house is unique. Like I think plenty of people have tried. Zillow had tried at one point to say, can we predict a home price, right? And it's
mhm,
very hard to quantify the quality of a home. Two homes can be in the same subdivision. One of them could be facing the lake, and the other one could be facing, I don't know, maybe the parking lot, right? And uh, and so generally we would have said, hey, look, you know your home well. Uh,
yeah,
Look at the data, but then also know the reality of your home. So like maybe the base price is too high. Let's
yeah,
reduce that. But then the flip side is also, and generally speaking, if it hadn't gotten booked that day, we would have said, hey, look, after 7 days, our algorithm would have said, hey, look, your base price is probably too high. You're not getting
yeah,
any bookings. Like what's happening, right?
yeah,
Um, so, and then there is that limiting belief kind of thing where there are times, so like generally speaking, it's not just about increasing prices, right? It's also reducing prices
yeah,
during lean periods. But sometimes it's you think that it doesn't make sense for me to ever go below $300 a night.
yeah,
But then we say, look, all your dates in low season are sitting at 300. You still haven't gotten booked. Let's try going down to 250 and see if you can get some things booked.
yeah,
And then on the flip side, the biggest event in town is happening, and you have said, I never want to go bill above $800 a night. And we are like, this thing, Taylor Swift, would you would have gotten it booked at 2x the price because there is just so much more demand. So,
yeah. She's a market
uh,
maker.
yeah, so
Yeah,
like sometimes like we tell our customers one absolutely true about training. Like we, it is any pricing tool, it's not all knowing, and like it doesn't know everything you know.
yeah,
So like it is important to know how to drive this thing,
yeah,
and then again like uh, very important to like attend the trainings to see, okay, what bells and whistles exist, because everybody has a different process. So for example, some folks are more risk averse
yeah,
than others, right? So we have customers who say, hey, look, if my next month is not like 70-80% booked, I'm panicking. uh, and they might be in a location where like half the bookings come in the last month. So like our thought is like, okay, one, we provide a lot of data to say, okay, it's okay not to panic. if you have 30% vacancy in the next 30 days, because most of the bookings are still yet to come in your market. It's totally fine. But then if you are someone who says, hey, it just helps me sleep better, I don't care about what the data says, you can go and adjust your settings to say, okay, I want more farther out bookings.
Yeah.
I'm okay taking on slightly lower prices and it'll help me sleep better. All of these bells and whistles exist. So, yeah,
It's so customizable. You're absolutely
yeah,
right. I was just speaking with our group, and one of the questions that popped up is an insurance company reached out, and she had Instabook on, and she's still in the negotiation phases. Should she leave Instabook on further out, all and accept
yeah,
those bookings, which will impact her ability to, generate revenue
yeah,
from the insurance? And it's two sided. If you
yeah,
feel like you won't sleep at night knowing that you are impacting your ability to get these quick bookings, versus if your overall strategy is to have hold out hope for these insurance companies, right? So
yeah,
it's very very I think customizable. And so my recommendation to her was, for me, I would hold out for the insurance since I'm having a conversation with them, and I'll know
yeah,
within the next 48 hours or so what direction we're going in, and then
yeah,
we could, return to the Instabook strategy. So it's a
yeah,
two-edged sword for sure. And so what we're seeing, excuse me, Anurag, is insurance policy holders. We're working with the corporation. We have the film industry that we're serving. We have data centers that are being built in some of our markets. We have a political campaign
right,
going on
yeah,
right now in the US. So we have political campaign staff that need
yeah,
housing. We have medical professionals. There's so many midterm rental strategies that are out there. What I love about one of the slides that you shared a couple of years ago showed that, well, you know what, this midterm rental demand, although everyone's talking about travel nurse, travel nurse, travel nurse, it was here before the big travel nurse buzz. And so whether
yeah,
it's climate migrants, snowbirds, there are
yeah,
such a variety of midterm rental
yeah,
guests that are out there that need a place to stay for 30 days, 60 days, 90 days, so on and so
yeah,
forth. So
yeah,
I use inside of Pricelab a customization, which is the stay restrictions for my far out bookings. I
yeah,
like increase it so much to de-incentivize people to block my calendar for 2 or 3 night stays, because I want to incentivize those 30-day stays further out, but closer to my recent checkout. I like to use a 2 night, 3 night in my market. Am I
yeah.
doing it right, Anurag? This is what we teach our community. Yeah.
That is the right way to go, generally
Okay.
speaking. Um, yeah, like you said, if you take a 2 night booking a month out, now somebody who was going to show up in a week's time
Yeah.
and want to stay for a month or 2 months or 3 months can't can't book your place anymore, right?
Yeah.
Because, well, there is a 2 night booking sitting in the middle,
Yeah.
uh, and generally speaking, so you want to say, okay, I want to keep my calendar a little open
Yeah.
to absorb. And again, this doesn't work in every location, right? So you have to find out if your market is a midterm rental market or not in some ways, right?
Well, I
Um,
get that question all the time, and I don't mean to
yeah,
interrupt you, but I think this is a good
yeah.
actual question. So, outside of having that intimate knowledge of your market, what are some ways that our members can identify if their market is a midterm rental friendly market or not?
Right. So there are. I can think of the Pricelabs answer in some ways.
Okay.
I'm trying to also think if there is a non-Pricelabs answer
Okay.
for this. So, for example, there are websites where you list when you want to do midterm rentals, right?
Mm-hmm.
Furnished Finder is one. I
Yep.
think Traveling Nurses or
Mm-hmm.
many of these places. Uh, Go find out, like, uh, do people in your city list there? Like, if nobody is listing there, uh, maybe it's not as prevalent.
Yeah.
My hope here is that if a lot of people were coming for midterm stays, then enough supply would have shown up there, right?
Yeah.
You could be onto something if nobody is listing or very few people
Right.
are listing. You could be like, maybe this is an open market. Like, how do I
Yeah.
find out? Um, the way we answer it is we have a product called Market Dashboards, and it costs $10 a month. But to answer this question, you don't need the per month part. You just use it once and then you're done, kind of a thing.
Hmm.
Um, where we will show you the length of stay patterns uh, that tend to book on Airbnb over the course of the year. So, like, okay, the occupancy in this market is maybe 80% of on average, but like what portion of that comes from 30 plus night rentals, what portion comes from 14 to 30 night rentals. The way we do this is by essentially scraping publicly available data on Airbnb and looking at each property on Airbnb and their calendars to say what dates are available, what dates are not available, and then you do it frequently to see what these dates that were available now became unavailable. So quite likely it is like if your calendar was empty and then there a 2 night booking showed up, your calendar on Airbnb to every other booker will, or to every other guest will have those 2 dates as unavailable.
Yeah.
And that gives you a sense that okay, maybe those 2 dates got booked. Now instead of 2 days becoming unavailable together, if 30 days become available, we say okay, maybe those 30 nights got booked, or if 45 nights got booked, then 45 nights become unavailable. So we track all of these changes and are able to paint a picture to say, hey, look, in this market, a lot of the dates that become unavailable uh, are from longer stays. So maybe this is a midterm rental market. Now, important thing here is always like when you're looking at data, never rely on one source, to go look at multiple sources, right? And that's where I'm trying to say like, okay, I know the Pricelabs answer, like I want to find out what other answers exist there. Generally speaking, you spoke about a few things. If it is nurses, is there a big hospital there? Because if there is, likely that that kind of demand might exist. Are there large companies around? I know we have customers in Seattle and San Francisco who mainly cater to Amazon and Microsoft and Facebook employees who, when they move there, the company provides housing for the first 3 months, kind of a thing. And they have relationships with these folks to say, okay, I have a house, 3 months, sure, like gladly taking it, right? So some of it could just be like if you're in that market, get a feel of things around you. And then some of it could be like external sources like us.
I love that. And I know from the beginning, I feel like from the beginning of time, Price Labs was already hip to using and leveraging AI insights. Can you speak to that a
Yeah.
little bit and what that progression has looked like over the last few years?
Yeah. So this actually plays into the whole UI or interface question. Um, so we process a lot of data. Like I said, like we scan every property on Airbnb, Verbo, Booking.com to say how are they changing their prices, how's the occupancy changing, and things like that. And we use that data to forecast what do we think will happen in the future, right? If we see May as being a very strong month in Atlanta, we'll say okay, maybe we can increase prices compared to other months. And if June was going to be very like much lower than last year's, you will say okay, like June is not shaping up really well. You haven't booked either. Let's try to reduce your bookings, no prices, to get you some bookings. All of this in the these are all um, mathematical models that come up with the price recommendations. The flavor of AI that has become very popular of late is generative AI or LLMs, language models, where uh, their usefulness is almost complementary. So
Okay.
ChatGPT or similar models are not going to come up with price recommendations for you. Like they don't know what's happening in the market.
Right.
Where they end up being helpful is we show a lot of data to our customers.
Mhm.
Uh, we have a tab called neighborhood data where we say, okay, here's your property, here are recommendations. You can also go and see, okay, what's happening in my market. One of the feedback we hear is, hey, look, if I'm a professional revenue manager or if I'm into data and charts, this all makes total sense. I can read the data, I can figure out what's happening. But a lot of times, I don't necessarily have the time to figure out what each of these lines means, and or even to interpret, like, okay, what's the right way to interpret these two lines being close to each other versus being away from each other.
Yeah.
And so we created this AI Insights button that says, hey, look, here's the data. Uh, can we provide you a text summary of what you're seeing? And we want to address two things with this. One, there is a lot of data that we show, but once you learn how to read it for a few dates, it becomes a lot easier to realize that, oh, this is actually pretty straightforward. But can we give you those like 2, 3, 4, 5 insights that help you realize that, oh, this is what I'm looking at, like this is straightforward. So a lot of the data we show is not terribly complex, but then the AI insights or the LLM models are helping make sense out of it, so that then you get more comfortable with data, essentially. Does that make sense?
I love that. That makes a
Yeah.
whole lot of sense. So for me, what I love using ChatGPT and AI for as well is you're right, interpreting large amounts of information. So for example, if
Yeah.
I'm doing a master class and I have 200 people attending Anurag, and they all have a variety of questions. But at the end of the day, some of the questions may fall into the same category. So part
Yeah.
of instead of me manually going through and say, okay, this is a question about how to analyze markets. This is a question about how to set up a property for a midterm rental. Well, if I can take that, database of questions and add it to ChatGPT, it helps me to categorize and identify how many times this type of question is showing up. And it helps me to then create a picture of, what it is our community we need to be teaching
Yeah.
about next week because this question keeps showing up time and time again. So that's how I use it. And I hope, someone listening could
Yeah.
see the value of, the time that it can save in terms of how to process large amounts of data and help with
Yeah.
categorization. I think it does that pretty well.
I'll say you still that kind of stuff it does pretty well. Like when you ask it for facts, is when sometimes it can like go awry. Like so
Yeah,
I
for
do want to
sure.
add a disclaimer. Like don't fully trust it. Like you
Yeah.
do want to like especially on subjects that you don't know too much about. It can say things that with a lot of confidence that is just not
Like,
right, and you're
I don't
like,
think that's
yeah,
right. 100%, 100%. Yeah,
yeah,
it's been a great tool for me to process information, but yeah, I don't
yeah,
trust it very much. You're absolutely right.
yeah,
So you mentioned the market dashboards. I find that to be very interesting. I actually used it a while back with one of the members of our community for a market that is right outside of where I live. I actually went and I looked at it based on the dashboard. It didn't feel very promising at all, but the
yeah,
numbers seemed so great. I went out there, I drove out there and looked at this market, and it was so rural. I kid you not. And
yeah,
it had construction happening. And when I looked to see, well, what are they building? Maybe there's something. It was a Tractor Supply, which is a store that just doubled down on this is so rural. This is
yeah,
so I told them, no, 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 no. I don't feel comfortable.
yeah,
This would be high
yeah,
risk. And it was the
yeah,
market dashboard that helped us to identify it. And then when we used some other tools
yeah,
as well, we had one more
yeah.
tool that kind of corroborated that. So
Got it.
I think that's very,
Got it.
very handy. So I get the question on Urag a lot of times. Well, what's the difference between Pricelabs? What's the difference between Airbnb smart pricing? What's the difference
Yeah,
between other dynamic pricing tools that is in the
yeah,
category of where Pricelabs sits? Would you mind
yeah,
giving us a little highlight? Because I have my own answer, but I would love
yeah,
your perspective on how is Pricelabs different from the other dynamic pricing tools as well as
yeah.
the smart pricing on Airbnb.
Right. So the Airbnb answer is a little easier in some ways, right?
Mhm.
Um, at one level, you would think um, you would want to say Airbnb has a lot of data available about every
Yeah.
booking that happens on their platform. Uh, the the place where this slightly falls apart is that a lot of people rightly list not just on Airbnb but also on booking.com.
Yeah.
So for a particular home, Airbnb doesn't even know how much it's making, because many of the dates are getting booked on booking.com or Verbo, or sometimes people have direct bookings as well, where like they create their own website and things like that. But even then, Airbnb has a lot of data. Now, one, I think their expertise potentially is just not in data, or the platform is designed to cater to every Airbnb host in some ways, right? So where we excel is just in providing customers with a lot more bells and whistles to say, hey, look, uh, the the hosts that really care about finding out how can they maximize their revenue, uh, those are the ones that sort of we end up catering to say, okay, you don't just want to turn on a switch, which is what a lot of times in smart pricing, Airbnb smart pricing, there's a switch and then there's a minimum and maximum, and that's about as much control you get, right? And we say like that shouldn't be the end of it. Like you should be able to do a lot more with your pricing strategy.
Yeah.
And a lot of customers to begin with uh, will still do the switch and then maybe set their base price. We'll show them data, but then over time, as they learn more, they'll want to do more about it. So they might say, hey, look, I want to cater more to midterms. How do I do that? And then your strategy comes up to say, okay, I want to take short bookings only last minute and then longer bookings further out. Somebody says, how can I do so that when I have a gap between two bookings, I might have a minimum of 3 nights, but if there's a 2-night gap, I don't want it to be wasted. What can I do? And there are a few things that you can do. You can say, okay, if it's a 2-night gap, I want to reduce my minimum nights to 2. Take something. And then you can say, but I also want to make sure my revenue, like from a booking, is at least something. Like not, I don't want to sell those 2 nights for cheap. And then you can say, okay, when there's a 2-night gap, let's bump up the price. If somebody books, you at least make something meaningful, right? So those kinds of bells and whistles and control, and how much market data that we surface that's truly relevant for somebody who's looking to maximize their revenue. So that's one. The second one is partly because of the control that we provide. A lot of times what I hear is Airbnb smart pricing will drop the rates to the floor, and which I don't fully know why that would happen, but that's the feedback that we get a lot of times. And so then, and maybe that's also a part of control, right? Where we give our customers the control to say like, okay, you have the full control of the base price. So if you want to price things higher, you just bump up the base price, and then that's how it works. He'll give you feedback to say, hey, look, with these higher prices, maybe you are overvaluing your home in this case, and nobody seems to be booking, so maybe you should reduce it back. But you still have the full control. So I would say, generally speaking, boils down to how much control. Compared to other providers, I think the answer is again on the similar lines, where we tend to provide a lot more of these customizability compared to other providers. And then also like the kind of data that we show about the market. I think we rolled it out almost a year and a half back, but I think we are the only provider even now that shows how is your market. And by market, I don't mean all of Atlanta. But if you're located in a particular part of Atlanta, how is that sub-market? We call it the hyper-local market, like the closest homes around you. How are those performing compared to a year back? Is in real time. So like, for example, June is still 14 or 15 days away. And right now, maybe in Atlanta, June is booked, let's say 25%. And last year, you can easily go and look in different places. Last year, June was maybe 45% booked. I'm just making this up.
Yeah. Yeah.
And but the difference is that last year's June is completed. All the bookings have happened, and then it was 45% booked. This year's June is still ongoing. Right now it is 25%, but eventually maybe it will cross 45, maybe it won't. How do I know? Like, how do I know right now? Because I don't want to make decisions for to reduce June prices after June is done. I want to make that decision right now.
Right.
Uh, so uh, we have this data in our product, and the AI insights actually show this data and talk about it as well to say on May 14th in 2023, how occupied was June? And maybe at this point of time last year, June was 20% booked, and right now it's 25% booked. And now you say, oh, this June is actually going to be stronger than last year. So that kind of data, the depth of data, and then because of that, also the depth of the recommendations generally is something we pride ourselves on. So yeah, in terms of differentiation, I think that depth of how much data we show and use and how
Yeah.
localized it is, and then how customizable the platform is to execute your particular strategies when you graduate to the point where you say, okay, i'm making I'm doing well, but I want to do something more. How can I
Yeah.
do that? Yeah.
I love it. I love it. I love it.
Yeah.
And you're absolutely right. You can be, at the basic level where you're just getting started,
Yeah.
or you could elevate yourself to next level where you're doing real revenue
Yeah.
management and
Yeah.
pricing management, which is amazing. So, question for you, Anurag. This is a basic question for those who are very new and they're not as familiar with Price Lab. What is base price? What's that? What does that mean? Does that mean my lowest price? Does that mean an average price? Does that mean around my max price? What does the base
Yeah.
price mean? And why is it so important? Because it's one of the first things we want to set. And I know it's one of the
Yeah.
first things that Price Labs gives a recommendation on.
Yeah. So the base price is the average price across the year. So this includes low season when you may not get booked, high season when you're very likely booked, uh, midweek, weekend, everything included. So think of if your base price is 100, based on the location that you're in, we will come up and say, hey, look, July is high season, and it's high season, like we need to increase the prices by 30% during July. And in August, it is high season but slightly lower than July. Maybe it's 25% increase on base price. So then 130 becomes your average price for July because 100 was your base price. Now that doesn't mean every date in July is 130. Maybe July 4th, a lot of people are traveling in, and that we say, hey, look, there is a spike in demand, bump it up further, and that becomes 175. But then midweek, a week later, maybe it ends up being 110 because not that much demand is out there. Even though it's high season, it's midweek, and that 110 might also reduce over time. Even July 4th will reduce over time to say, right now it might be 175, but in a month's time, if it's still not booked, we will say, okay, let's tone it down and see if it gets booked now, kind of a thing, right? So the base price is in some ways a representation of your home's quality. Now, sorry, not your home's quality, your listing's quality.
Yeah.
There is a difference here.
Mhm.
A listing is the online persona of your home. So the home may be great, but if the listing is not, if the listing has poor pictures, a poor description, and bad reviews, then people are not going to book it if it is priced above the market. Um, like, in fact, like even in low season, it might be tough to. Even in high season, it might be tough to get it booked at a good price. So you generally, this is true across everything. If the product is bad, it's hard to sell it. The price stops mattering, right? But a lot of times the differences in product are not like, it's not all bad. Like the reviews are bad, pictures are bad, and everything everything can't be bad. Like you are going to have decent pictures, you are going to have good reviews, uh, but even then there are slight perceptible differences where a lot more people are choosing another home over yours, even though they are both in the same subdivision. Maybe it's how you have decorated it, and then over time you keep improving on these things. And as you improve, we will notice that, hey, look, you started off with this $100 a night, but you're getting quite a lot of bookings. We think you can bump up your price because maybe you've made improvements to the home. Maybe you don't do anything, but Airbnb's algorithm, for whatever reason, is now ranking you better than it was before. Maybe
Yeah.
it's a string of good reviews that came through, right? A lot of things impact the perceived quality of your listing, and that's what the base price tries to reflect.
That's amazing. I love that. And as far as the minimum and maximum, I usually set a minimum on Urag, but I don't set a
Yeah.
maximum. Am I doing it wrong?
This is a question. There's no right or wrong on this one.
Okay.
Like we talked about, if Taylor Swift shows up, you don't want to cap your prices
Mm-hmm.
at twice the base price. On the other hand, there is a genuine reason to say, look, I do want to cap my price at something, even if the biggest thing is happening in town. If I raise my prices 5x, I might get a booking, but the guest might come and say, hey, look, I know why the price was so high, because there was this thing going on. I booked it because I needed a place to stay, a good place to stay, and this was a good place to stay. But when reviewing, they might say on value for money, maybe they give you 4 stars or 3 stars, right? Generally speaking, we don't see that very often. People do understand that, okay, with spikes in demand, prices are going to be high. But there are folks who are generally concerned about, like, okay, I don't want to get a bad review. Uh, and for that reason, I put a max price to say, okay, whatever happens, I'm happy with this much increase on the price during peak season or peak travel periods.
Got it. Got it. So I know that Pricelabs has launched a new, I guess, what is it called? An update, so to speak, or a product inside of the
Yeah.
platform, the Revenue Estimator Pro. Can you talk to us a little bit
Yeah.
about that?
Yes. So remember how I talked about market dashboards? That's
Yes.
something we rolled out in 2020,
Hmm.
and those are essentially to like get a really deep dive into a market to say what kind of length of stay patterns exist, is it a good midterm market or not, all kinds of things. One of the things we kept seeing our customers do is that when they were interested in purchasing a property in a certain market, they
Hmm.
would go order a market dashboard to figure out how much can this make.
Yeah.
But market dashboards have so much information there, and for that reason they are priced a little higher. They were priced at $10 for a small market and $20 for a market with 5,000 listings and so on. And the request that our customers kept making is like, hey, I get a lot of if you're a property manager or if you're evaluating, I'm not looking at the same market every time. Like
Right.
I want different locations to evaluate different locations in different homes. Can we have a subscription where I can try out many different locations and
Yeah.
not pay $20 per location or $10 per location? So we said, okay, if all on the first part, if all a potential owner or property manager is thinking about is what's the revenue potential, uh, we don't need the entire depth of market dashboards. We only need the revenue, occupancy, and ADR. These three pieces of information,
Yeah.
and we can offer that for cheap. And then once you have sort of narrowed in on, okay, out of these 10 locations, this is the one I really want to double down on, then you go maybe do a market dashboard to see, okay, give me all the in-depth information about this market.
That's awesome.
Does
And
that
how much did you say that one was?
that one is let me look up, it has different subscription levels.
No worries. We
uh,
can actually look it up and share it in the show notes. And the reason I asked that question, honestly, is because
yeah,
one of the reasons that I signed up for Price Labs at the time, back
yeah,
in 2018, 2019, Anurag, was it
yeah,
was one of the only platforms that was offering a flat fee per month. To
yeah,
be honest with you, tech creep is something
yeah,
that, I'm concerned
yeah,
about for my community because everyone
yeah,
has a new tech tool they want you to sign up for, and before
yeah,
you know it, your tech bill is $1,000
yeah,
per month. And if you're a new or short term rental host, I want you to keep
yeah,
those costs down and only really use
yeah,
technology that's going to impact your decision making, your ability to make life
yeah,
easier. You don't need 800 tools, and you don't
right,
need a tool eating away at your a percentage of your revenue every single
yeah,
month. And so I was
yeah,
really appreciative that Price
yeah,
Labs was under $20 a month, very
yeah,
affordable, very cost effective, and it gave me the
yeah,
information that I need. It has the customizations that I need.
yeah,
And so that's really one of the reasons why I signed up for it, and I've been
yeah,
happy ever
good,
since.
yeah,
And
yeah,
and that's really important, guys. So beware of tech creep. There's someone right now working in their basement, that's going to launch a new product for you that's going to help you host more intelligently or in a way that you've never hosted before. And I get that question all the time. So many tech tools, but all you need to get started is a channel manager and a dynamic pricing tool. That's it. Anything else, say, your HVAC and all of that, all of those integrations, that's fine and dandy, but it really adds up. I also use another tool for market analysis. I like to keep my technology stack less than, I would say, 75 to $50 per month per property. So if you're
yeah,
seeing that you're exceeding that, you're bloating your business technology wise as a new investor. If you're like enterprise, that's a whole different story. So I just wanted to put that out there to our members who are getting started. Any opinions about that at all, Anurag?
no. Again, like you said, depends on how many properties you're managing. Like we also have customers with one property that don't even use a channel manager.
Yeah.
They
You
they
you
straight up
probably don't need
use
it. Yeah,
right.
absolutely.
Like, but then if you're on just Airbnb, you
Yeah,
probably don't
you
need a
don't need
channel
it.
manager.
Exactly.
But when you do, as a second step, you do want to look at Verbo and Booking.com as well, because uh, that helps you sort of diversify a little bit,
Yes,
to say,
for
okay,
sure.
if suddenly I stop getting bookings from Airbnb, do I have something else to fall back on? And that's when
Exactly.
you start needing, so like, a channel manager and things like that.
A
So
hundred
yeah,
percent.
on day one, like start lean, and then
Yeah. Exactly. And I do find, like I said, there
yeah,
are so many technology
yeah,
tools out there. I think
yeah,
Airbnb is such a hot topic. There are people
yeah,
creating tech tools
yeah,
for the community, and you don't need all of it.
yeah,
You don't need all of it. As a matter of fact,
yeah,
I saw a tool that could estimate, it estimates for you on this night, if you're priced at, say, $300 a night, the probability
yeah,
that you're going to get booked is 32%. And I was like, okay. But if you're priced at $400 a night, the probability of you getting booked. And so it was going night to night to night, and your probability of getting booked. And it just felt like that sounds cool. And if I see a spreadsheet, I'm in heaven, but
yeah,
sometimes sometimes
yeah.
it's overdoing it a little bit. So
It's like to have to hop off in a minute.
yeah, no worries. All
So
right, so
yeah,
Anurag, thank you, thank you, thank you. We're
yeah.
going to share with the community how to connect with you and share it in the show
All
notes.
right,
I so appreciate you
awesome.
spending time with us. This was a lot of fun.
Yeah, same here.
All right, bye bye for
All
now.
right, thank you so much, Vijay.